Hello and welcome to the CNBC-TV18 special. I'm Shireen Bhan. We're at the NITI AAYOG. The NITI AAYOG has turned 2, replacing the erstwhile Planning Commission. Joining us today is the Vice Chairman of the NITI AAYOG, Arvind Panagariya. So I appreciate you joining us on CNBC-TV18. Congratulations on the 2nd anniversary of the NITI AAYOG.
Thank you.
Let me start by asking you about what you make of the macro situation, sir. I think politicians, of course, are jumping to conclusions on whether demonetization has been a success or a failure, and I would imagine that policymakers will perhaps need to take a much more measured approach because we don't have enough evidence on the ground to suggest either. If I would ask you to take a look at the macro situation, yesterday we had the PMI data which suggests a contraction. We had the core sector data which month on month has shown a decline for a whole bunch of sectors from cement to steel. Do you believe that this is likely to continue for some time more?
But first, let me add some of the positive news also, that the tax revenues, both direct and indirect, have been up. So the news is generally mixed. There are some also other indicators which, at least in manufacturing, were showing improvements. Services was down. So it's a mixed picture, but it is one which is consistent with what we had been expecting. I had actually in my own interviews earlier said that in the current quarter in which the demonetization decision was made, and possibly even the quarter that follows, which will be the last quarter of the fiscal 16-17, we might see some decline in the growth rate.
But when you say you might see some decline, so can you quantify for us what kind of decline you anticipate, or what is the estimation that you're working with at this point in time? Because we haven't really got a clear sense from the government. We've got a number from the Reserve Bank which brings it down to about 7% from 7.6%. Economists are divided on whether it's 1%, 2%, or perhaps even higher. What is the estimate that you're working with if you do expect a decline at least over the next 2 quarters?
So right now, as you have said, we really don't have the concrete information. So I hesitate to put out any figure. I think in the absence of any reliable data, I think we should hold on to that. Hold on in terms of jumping to any estimates. But I certainly lean on the side that the impact is going to be small, and subsequently, as we get into the next fiscal year 17-18, we would really more than make up for what we lose in these 2 quarters.
You just had a meeting with the Prime Minister and, of course, other members of the government as well here at the NITI AAYOG just before the end of 2016. One of the aspects that was discussed, I'm given to understand, was the impact of demonetization, but beyond that as well, on what the policy imperatives ought to be now for the government. In the context of what we've seen happen, and in the context of that meeting, what should we now realistically expect? Because the hope is that there is going to be this big stimulus. I don't know what that finally will mean realistically, but what should we bet our hopes on?
Well, let's wait and see, because until we know what has been the economic impact of demonetization itself, it is really premature to jump to conclusions. So whether or not we need a big stimulus and all, answer to that question will depend on what we observe. If the impact is minimal, then perhaps it will be prudent to stay course on at least fiscal consolidation. Some room for increased expenditure may nevertheless come from increased revenues. So as long as the increase in expenditures is matched by increase in revenues, I think that's generally a good news. Also, we certainly need to increase expenditure on capital expenditures, meaning infrastructure largely, and that can be done in any case while staying within the fiscal targets.
So you do believe that fiscal consolidation, or the roadmap for fiscal consolidation that the government set out when it came to office, you believe that you should stay the course with that path?
Well, unless there is a compelling reason to deviate from it. Now, I'm not so, for the want of a better word, I'm not so ideological in this matter,
sure.
but I think, we have to be pragmatic, which to me translates into saying that, if there is no compelling reason, then we should simply stay course with fiscal consolidation plan. If there is a compelling reason, then I think, we ought to use the instruments that are available to us.
Speaking of the instruments that are available, sir, and this is something that NITI has worked on, and that is restarting the process of strategic disinvestments. You have identified 17 companies for strategic divestment. Of course, the actual process of the divestment will be handled by the DIPAM ministry, which is under the finance ministry. But are you feeling hopeful, given the current market climate, that perhaps we are going to be able to achieve the number set out for strategic disinvestments?
Well, right now my objective is that we get it started, and so I am certainly still very much hoping and pushing for our first strategic sale by DIPAM. Do you believe
it'll close in this financial year?
Well, I'm certainly still hoping that it will.
Okay. A lot of possibilities on how the land bank that some of these companies are sitting on can be monetized. What has been the recommendation of NITI AAYOG on that?
Now, on the land bank question, that relates to the closure of the SIC unit. We also had studied a number of SIC units, which we eventually recommended for closure. Now, to close the SIC units, one of the problems that arises is that these SIC units have a lot of land.
Okay.
Without disposal of that land, you cannot close the unit. And this is where the land bank issue comes in.
Okay.
And we had suggested that we create some sort of a land bank kind of institution where the land of a PSU, which is to be closed down, can be deposited. And then the land bank should then use that land to rejuvenate the land market in these specific cities. Before
I move away from strategic disinvestment, is the possibility of listing some of these unlisted public sector units, because that's been one of the recommendations of the NITI AAYOG as well. How soon do you expect that, and what is the feedback that you get on that process itself?
Well, there is a decision underway on listing a large number of public sector units which are not.
Have you identified
listed.
How many you would like to, or which ones you would like to?
So I don't know the numbers, but the number is large.
Okay.
The currently unlisted public sector units are probably larger in numbers than those that are actually listed. So, which means certainly more than 50%.
But is there a rationale of which companies you would like to list?
No. I think any companies that can actually be potentially listed. Now, one of the requirements for listing is that 10% of the equity has to be actually sold in the market.
Right.
And so, as long as that is feasible, we should do it. So it's not a matter of selecting this or that. I think, all of the ones that can be listed would be worthwhile to list.
Do you expect movement on this front in this financial year, at least in terms of just getting started?
I think part of the hesitation currently is that the market is on the low side, and therefore if the units go for listing today, the shares that will be actually disinvested will fetch a low price. That's really principally the hesitation within the government. But I think we have to start somewhere, and so yes, personally I think we need to get started at least even in a sluggish market or relatively poorly performing market. There may be certain sectors that are doing well, and in those sectors possibly we could still dare to start disinvesting, so that you get to the 10% disinvestment, and therefore
is there a hesitation on the part of the finance ministry to move?
Well, no, I'm just speculating that what could delay the matter.
Okay. One of the other objectives of the NITI AAYOG has been to act as a think tank for the government and provide ideas from a policy perspective for the future. One of the ideas that you've been betting on is the creation of these coastal zones, so to speak, which could aid in the employment generating aspect, which is one of the missions of this government, and it could also aid in the competitiveness aspect that you believe India has significant room to grow, and especially as far as the export objective is concerned. How soon do you believe we could see some further movement on that front? Could we see something in the budget? This is something that you've been pushing for a while now.
Yes, no, I very much hope that we convince the Finance Ministry to make a provision for these zones in the forthcoming budget. I really think that the time is opportune, and we really cannot afford to lose more time on this, because the large companies currently operative in China in the labor-intensive sectors are beginning to move out, and before they move out to countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, and Myanmar, and Bangladesh, I think we have to make a move and bring them over here.
And I know you've been a big sort of supporter of India's need to get more share of the global market, and you've always spoken about how India needs to push more aggressively on the export front. But given the fact that we're seeing this global tax regime in a sense being redrawn, especially with the US trying to move towards a much more aggressive cut as far as corporate tax rates are concerned, do you believe that it might make sense for the government to take a much more radical approach now to corporate taxes, as opposed to that 4-year 25% timeline and tax rate that the government had articulated when it came to office?
There's certainly room for moving more aggressively, meaning preponing our timetable for the corporate profit tax reform. It is an announced policy now that will come down to 25% with exemptions
being
taken away. And I think we should certainly do that. I think it's not, for us, it's not merely an issue of competing with the United States. It's simply a matter of rationalizing our own tax system so that, you broaden the tax base and lower the rates. I think excessively high tax rate in general hurts.
But do you think that 25% itself needs to be reviewed? Do you think that one, of course, is accelerating the pace to 25%, but moving the needle from 25% to a lower number is perhaps the need of the hour, given what's happening in the rest of the world?
Let us at least, get to 25. We can reassess it, but I'd at least, like us to come down to 25 relatively soon. And there's no harm. You can reassess. Remember that we also need some sort of balance between the personal income taxation and the corporate tax rates. So there is that issue also that,
do you believe that a radical move on personal income taxes is also the need of the hour to spur consumption?
Well, again, I believe that we need to broaden the tax base. And if we really can broaden the tax base, then it opens the room for bringing some of the tax rates down.